some tips for doing exposure therapy, and I'm not going to go into great detail about what exposure therapy is or how to do it. This is really more tips for people that are going to do exposure therapy or are currently doing exposure therapy. Now, with that said, maybe you can enjoy this video even if it's not something that that you're involved in or are going to be involved in. Maybe you can just use it as just relaxing sounds to kind of tune out, or maybe you can pass along some of these tips to someone that that is doing exposure therapy. Anyway, I just want to preface this because we do live in a very litigious society. The purpose of this video is not to diagnose, treat, or cure any condition. And like I said, this is really intended for those that are doing exposure therapy in a clinical situation, or for anybody that just wants to kind of chill out. They might even find this interesting. So, I will say that exposure therapy is a systematic way, and systematic is very key. This is a systematic way to face your fears and over time lessen them gradually over time. It's very much a highly validated form of therapy. There's a ton of really great research, and it's considered to be the gold standard treatment for OCD and a lot of other anxiety disorders. I will say that I did this particular type of therapy, and for me it was extremely useful, extremely valuable, really, really helpful, and it helped me to really get out of a personal hell. And whenever I still have, OCD flare-ups, I still turn to this therapy for sort of like what I call a tune-up. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about exposure therapy. Just very, very effective. And but it takes a lot of work and dedication, and so I think it's important to me to share tips that really helped me to get the most out of exposure therapy. So without further ado, excuse me, here are some of my tips for getting the most out of exposure therapy. So, first of all, know that your anxiety level will get worse before it gets better. And this is a tough thing to face. It feels counterintuitive, but the idea is to get yourself into that heightened state of arousal, of anxiety, and to do it repeatedly and systematically over a period of time, so that eventually it lessens. The more exposure you do, the more desensitized you get to whatever it is that triggers your anxiety, your OCD, your fear, whatever it might be. So just know that it does get better, but the whole point in the beginning is to make it really, really bad. Again, it's tough, and that's why you need every tool in your arsenal to stick with this form of therapy and to get the most out of it. Also, prepare in a lot of instances to look and feel really silly. So one of my fears that I faced head on in exposure therapy was a fear of, I won't get too in depth with it. It was, well, at least to me it seemed like a strange fear, but I had this kind of phobia of strobe lights and would avoid them. And so I had to make myself, like, literally look at them and, go through the experience of essentially having an anxiety attack. And even going to such extremes as, like, just making, like, in an exaggerated way, almost going through the whole, like, acting out, like, freaking out, because, there are strobe lights in the room, and just making it extra dramatic just to get the most out of it. And, you feel silly because it's like, I'm staring at a strobe light, and so, you might feel like the whole thing is kind of absurd and ridiculous. That's actually good. You hope that you can get to a point where you can actually laugh at, the subject of your fear or obsession or whatever it may be. Another tip is to use sticky notes and to just put them in a lot of different places, maybe in the car, by your computer, by your bed, and just write yourself, like, little reminders. So, for example, I used to have this obsessive thought that people around me would, like, I would get hyperfixated on their hands, and I would worry that they were going to hurt themselves or, like, get a paper cut or something like that. It was just obsessive. So my compulsion was to look away, but to sort of scatter out my exposures throughout the day, I would just have little sticky notes that said, look closer, or, don't look away, look closer. Just reminding myself to, instead of do the usual, behavior, the usual response of looking away, to actually just, actually fixate more on that thing that was kind of freaking me out, which was, usually just somebody's hands. And again, this goes back to what I said earlier about feeling silly, but, I just stuck with it. Of course, over time, my fear and compulsion to look away, disappeared, really. I also think it's a really beautiful thing to embrace technology. So that could be in the form of a YouTube video, that could be using virtual reality, which is actually a really big and interesting thing that's going on in exposure therapy in a clinical situation right now. But anyway, you can use things like VR or, YouTube videos to expose yourself to certain, stimuli, certain things that are triggers for you. For example, you might not be able, if you have a fear of snakes, maybe you can't always be around snakes, but you could expose yourself to, like, videos of snakes. So, yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing to embrace technology. I also recommend reaching out to friends and family. If you feel comfortable, let them know that you're doing exposure therapy, especially if you live with people and you're setting aside maybe an hour, or at the beginning just like 5 minutes, and you're you need your privacy. Let them know that you need that time and you need that privacy. Also reach out to them for support. Like I said, it can be very draining. It's difficult, and it's especially at first, you're getting yourself into this. You're bringing on intentionally a lot of anxiety. So, reach out for support. Journaling is also really good. It's just really good. Talk, and also journaling is really helpful for sort of celebrating your victories in exposure therapy, and just keeping track of your progress. It's also helpful whenever you go and talk to your therapist. You have a record of how each exposure It's just super helpful. If you're like me, sometimes, maybe you get into um, your in-person, weekly session and you just kind of forget what you want to talk about. So, I mean, journaling is just really good in general. This is really important, mix it up, do your exposures at different times of the day, in different rooms, in a different chair. Don't get too attached to doing it in any one particular setting or time, or only whenever you're like in a particular mood, because you don't want to get too attached to that. You want to be able to desensitize yourself to whatever it is that you fear or obsess about in any, situation or environment or time of day. So yeah, just try to mix it up. This one's really interesting. Be mindful of new compulsions that you might develop. So whenever I was doing exposure therapy, I found that whenever I was actually doing an exposure, I developed this really new and kind of subtle compulsion that involved like pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth, and it was just sort of like a comforting thing. But you don't want to bring on new compulsions, so I would have to say to myself, face my fear, do the exposure, but without, avoid that compulsion, make that part of the exposure therapy, if that makes sense. It's kind of complicated, but just be aware that new compulsions, could come in. Just be mindful of them. Practice self-care. This can be really draining, especially immediately after a session. So, take time to rest, treat yourself, take care of yourself. This is big. This is really big. Avoid, recreational drugs while you're doing exposure therapy. For all the obvious reasons, but, you're not really doing the exposure if you're only doing it, under the influence of, a recreational drug. Definitely be honest with your therapist. If you feel like something isn't working or you've had setbacks, express that. You're not helping yourself by keeping that to yourself, and it's normal to have, ups and downs as you do this. It's not it's not like a straight line. It can be up and down. Definitely celebrate your progress, no matter how small. Always, give yourself a pat on the back. This is not easy, but it's so worth it. It is so worth it. And lastly, I will say, don't stop as soon as you start to feel better. Keep going, because you really want to hardwire this into your brain. So yeah, don't give up, and as soon as you start to feel relief, keep going for a while. And that's something to talk with your therapist about. And like I said, sometimes I have obsessions or certain anxieties that return, and I come back to my exposure therapy. And since I've done it so extensively in the past, it usually doesn't take as long whenever I do what I call kind of an OCD or anxiety kind of tune-up, using this technique. So stay strong. You got this. Exposure therapy is amazing, and yeah, just stick with it. You can get out of this. You can get yourself out of hell. But reach out to people, and always a good idea to do this with an experienced clinician. So I wish you the very best, and may all beings be free of suffering. Bye for now.